Things were going great. Lots of paintings sold. This great big one in front of me, I was standing there and this guy came up with his partner. He was fussing around with something. He pulled out this dog-eared card. It was a postcard and he showed it to me and he said, look at this. And I said, oh, wow, that's from ages ago. That's from 10 years ago. And he said, when I was studying to be a heart surgeon, this was all I could afford. I loved it so much that I pegged it up on my wall and I swore that one day when I finally became a surgeon, I would buy one of your paintings. And that man and his wife had just purchased a major painting at that exhibition off the wall. He was now a heart surgeon, he had plenty of money, and he was a very happy man. Would a stranger want to wake up and look at this thing on my easel day after day after day for 10 or 20 years? In last week's video, I delivered some really depressing news, and that was how you could have sales of $100,000 in a commercial gallery, and after you take all your expenses off, gallery commission, etc., it ends up sometimes less than $15,000. And if you earned even less than that, the average of 30K, you'd end up in quite a lot of debt. A lot of you were horrified and said that I smashed your dreams. But I promised you some good news in this video, and I wanted to share with you what I actually did to make a pretty good living out of art without actually doing other jobs on the side. There were times I felt like I was selling my soul, but the bulk of it I really enjoyed. My methods aren't standard. I didn't have a formal arts training, so I wasn't playing any games when I started. I just used my noggin, my common sense, and I followed my nose right from the start because I was outside the industry and I was isolated. And that was probably my main superpower, being isolated. I really did not just survive, but I thrived because I had other money making going on outside the galleries. But I always knew that the galleries were important to build the CV and reputation. That's the irony of it. I built a system to sell directly to people, but I didn't plan that all carefully. It kind of just happened. So now I can give you my insight into what it was when I look back. And that's what I want to do today. There were some key points and I can actually nail them down and deliver them to you. I believe in doing work from the soul. It's not about selling out. There is commercial awareness. You've got to be aware of the market. So there's this balance. Now, there is one specific question, a leading golden solution that I asked every time, right from the start of my career, my first painting. This is the number one secret. Now, when I tell you this, don't start thinking, oh, that's a sellout, that contradicts everything you said. It's not. I have to tell it to you simply to get it across, but you need to just not panic when I do. This is so pure common sense, it almost defies belief. I didn't read this in a book. It was just what I knew to be true because I didn't have a formal art degree, right? So I led with this question. I came out of the world of reality. I'd been cleaning roadhouse toilets, sweeping floors, cooking short order cook in the middle of the desert. I'd been a stock camp cook. I wasn't an artist. I was coming at it from a different perspective. I would look at the painting on my easel or on my table and I would ask one question. Would a stranger want to wake up and look at this thing on my easel day after day after day for 10 or 20 years? This is a core question on how you work out what to put out there and what to keep back in here. Try to imagine this. If you can't work out why people aren't buying your work, just ask that question. Are you mixing up the expression of your internal contents, your soul work, with this other desire you have, which is to sell your work to complete strangers? This question is pretty much the pub test, as we call it in Australia. Does it pass the pub test? This is ground zero, wake up. Imagine someone has just forked out $2,000 for this thing. Just look at it on the easel, okay? Just look at it. Stand back and ask yourself, would you pay $2,000 for that? Would you pay that much money for that painting? And if you did pay it, would you have so much faith in that image that you would come out every morning, you know, even if you've had a rough night, it's hanging on your living room wall, And would you be happy that you had forked that money out for 10, 20 years? Ask it upside down, whichever way you want, but that's the question. The question that bites every other question in half and spits it out with the bones. It's as serious as it gets. This is where you step aside from, some sort of commercial perspective in your head, and you reframe yourself with empathy for the viewer. Step into their shoes. Know the difference. It doesn't mean that your soul work is invalid, but the more you get that formula correct, the better you're going to do in the world. The more you can get what you're feeling inside onto that canvas, onto that easel, and ask that question and have a yes, you're set for success. The purge that we have to do in our soul work, our deep spiritual work, that may well belong in your morning pages, and that could be visual or written. For some silly reason, artists can very easily get into this mindset of marketability as some sort of dirty word. It's not. In my earlier videos, I hinted towards formulaic stuff, but that's not what I'm talking about. That's when artists become lazy. They're still going to make money, good on them. And it's also that we quickly attach this thought to painting things that are trendy. This is more decorator work, blue to match the sofa or something like that. Everything's not just black and white. So I guess the soul question is, if the answer to my question is no, when you're looking at that picture on the easel, perhaps this artwork is too deep for the market. It's too subjective. And perhaps if you do put it out there and nothing happens, you might not have connected deeply enough to the broader collective consciousness of your audience. You get better at reading that. I think that artists who have good capacity to read people are very good at negotiating this. They pick it up very quickly. But instead of them being more generous or emphatic towards the client, they become either judgmental of the client, saying, you don't understand, you're a dum-dum, or they judge themselves as being not good enough. It doesn't mean it's not going to get up off the ground and do another one. So that is what I call the bedroom test. It is really about respecting the sanctuary of someone's home. Think about if you were in their position. Artists know when they've been exhibiting a lot of work and selling a lot of work, there's nothing like seeing your artwork in other people's homes. It gives you this completely different perspective. So my life changed when I got out of that super narcissistic kind of strategy or feeling of everything I do is golden. I don't think I ever really got into that. And start painting with this question in mind. It's a bit more considerate. And the trouble is when you're coming out of a university system, you're taught the complete opposite to that. You're painting for an academic's approval, and there's nothing to do with money. It's a completely different thing going on. The whole process is completely different. You see, it's chalk and cheese, but it doesn't mean you have to sell out. So that is basically the core factor. I could almost just not tell you anything else. If you get that right, it will work. The rest folds in place. However, there are a couple more really significant points to make. Now, you're going to notice I'm being metaphoric here. Stay with me. This one I call be a big frog in a small pond. The biggest problem you have is the flooding of the market, especially with social media. I started my art career in the late 1980s. There was no internet, no websites. All we had was fax machines, mail, letters, and telephones. So how did I actually do it? How did I build a really significant career at that time? Well, there is a story. So I'm going to try and summarize it. When I started painting, I was living in a very remote tourist town in Australia. It was right up in the northwest called Broome. Broome was thousands of miles from everything. It was almost the most remote tourist town in Australia. I didn't come to Broome as an artist. I found myself in Broome where I had to stay with my husband because of his trucking business. And then I became an artist in situ through accident, really. When I started, I was painting on pearl shells because I could paint. I just liked painting. I didn't have any great skills. Didn't I just paint little beach scenes? I was painting on t-shirts. It was tourism. I sold these things in little gift shops, and I did it because I could. I had no, tickets on myself to become an artist of, any great note or anything like that. It worked. And then it kind of evolved. I was sort of following my past experience in my life. I'd spent all these years in the outback living with very strange characters. It was a very hard life. And so they just started to creep into my paintings, and I accidentally sold a couple, and then a few other accidental things happened, and it just started to evolve from there. Now, what made me stand out, because there were plenty of other artists there in that tourism town, and it was only 3,000 people, and there was a very small art market, but there were plenty of artists trying to milk it. It was a unique place because of the turquoise blue waters and the red sand hills, all sorts of things that made it stand out. And we had this captive audience. It wasn't there when I first came there. Tourism picked up, and the people that were flying in were coming from, Melbourne and Sydney, and they had money, and they were staying at the fancy Cable Beach Club. So it kind of evolved, but I wasn't painting generic tourism paintings, and I was painting these strange things that were true to me from my outback life. I had some landscapey stuff, but it was kind of the narrative of what was inside myself and the observations that I saw out there. I just entered every little art competition. We had a regional gallery there. We just had a yearly Shinju Matsuri festival. I just entered all the competitions, and I won lots and lots of them accidentally. And that kind of propelled me. Then I just put paintings in the local art galleries, and they always sold. So every little piece of money that I got, I put it back and bought more materials, after what I had to pay to live. And that was how it built. It just expanded and expanded. I followed my nose, and then I got a reputation, and then I got opportunities because people saw my work. But there was a couple more very tricky little pieces to this. But first, before we move on, just remember this: big frog, small pond. And I was in the same town as a whole lot of other artists, painting some of the landscapes that they were, the beaches, etc. But I injected my X factor, which was my internal world and things in my life experience, your story is your voice, into those external scenes. And that's what set me aside. In the artistic sense, I stood out because I was different. You could do that in the city. What I want to say to you, stop screaming in the swamp of Instagram where you've got 10 million artists shouting the same thing. You've got to find your little pond. Be the only one doing your specific thing in that space, whatever it is. Think about it. Only you know this. Authenticity is the only way that you're going to stand out when the market's crowded. You can't afford to be a wilting little flower hiding in your basement. This is not what you're probably going to want to hear, but this made me rich, and I mean it. This part is what actually put money in my bank account right from the start. It is logistics. Yep. Good old-fashioned logistics. I knew something good would come out of my mum being the mechanic and chief toilet unblocker in the house one day. She was so practical. It was always about logistics. How can you make it happen? We had no picture framers up there. The most basic transport facilities, the Greyhound bus was how you shipped paintings, and it was so expensive. There was no marketing, promotion or anything like that. As I said, we just had fax machines, telephones and the mail. So I automatically, without thinking twice, solved every logistical problem that could block a client and even a gallery when I would send work to galleries. I solved all the logistic problems. There was no blockage in the way. They couldn't say, oh, the work's not framed. And I couldn't say, oh, I can't afford to get it framed. I didn't try and say, oh, it's too hard to ship this painting to all the way to Melbourne. I worked out how to do it. I learned how to do packing. I got boxes and made them out of old fridge boxes from the back of the furniture store. I learned how to frame with the most basic materials. It was hard, but I never thought that it was. I just felt excited. I could control every part of the process so that the person would buy a painting and I could actually get it to them within, a couple of weeks, and they didn't have to do anything. I solved all the problems. Same with the galleries. No other artists in Broome were able to efficiently get their 20 or 30 works from their studio to Sydney. I could, because I worked it all out. It was hard, but I worked it out. Don't pass on the problems, solve it. So what I would do when I got work back, and that was always a bit of a problem because back then the freight companies would damage everything. Oh, I would get it back. I had a studio, and remember, I'm a big frog in a small pond. I made friends with the woman in the resorts who was catering to all these rich people that were coming to visit. And I offered her like the idea to come to the studio, bring her clients. And then, you know, she started up like an art round. She would take her clients around to the artists' studios, and boy, oh boy, did we make ourselves available. And those people were captive audiences. These people had money. So they would come around to our studios, and that's how we made connections. I always had the work there hanging on the wall. Everything I earned, I put back into making sure I had beautiful big gallery walls to hang it on. It was studio walls, right? It was just a studio. And that meant it happened. Manifest the reality. My favourite saying in the entire world, and no one seems to know where it came from, is this one. The universe rearranges to accommodate your picture of reality. Just remember that. Put that on your fridge and think about it every day. That was how I was living my life. Now, in the previous video, I said that this work loses its value after it goes through a gallery. Well, guess what? Because I was isolated, it didn't. I moved it back to my studio, and if I had full control, I could sell it at whatever price I wanted to sell it at. I could spin the narrative. I could spend time with the clients, telling them about the work. And remember, no internet. Do you know how I sold my work? When people would come to the gallery, the visitors book was always open, always encouraging people. They would write their name down with, their address. And if they were interested in buying a painting and I didn't have something they wanted, I called my system Oz-wide, Australia-wide. I made these little photo albums, and I would get these tiny things and fill them up. I'd get 30 copies of every painting that I had in my stock and fill them up with these photos, and I'd put a price list, and I would post that little Oz-wide album to these clients all around Australia. They would receive in the mail this little photo album with a price list. 99% of the time they would buy something from that, and they'd send me the album back. That's how I got myself out there with no internet. They had no other way of seeing it. We had no email, nothing. You know what? You got 10 times more the capacity that I had then. I'm only telling you these things not to give you impossible goals, but to tell you that you just need to think big frog, small pond, put in the effort, solve the problems for them. They would sit in the house, go to their letterbox, and there was a beautiful album in their letterbox. They'd open it, and it had all these gorgeous paintings and a price list in there. All they had to do was ring me, say, I want that. I'd give them the bank details, and boom, I would send it to them. It worked. Strange enough, it worked. I removed all the barriers, and you can do that too. Basically made it effortless for someone to buy a painting by solving the problems. I see too many artists actually selling direct even to collectors, and they expect the collector to do all the work. Pick up only. There's no serving the person who's supporting your dream. You know, they are sponsoring you. And I would always send them a beautiful letter with a certificate of authenticity or something like that, thanking them for supporting my work. I know some artists still do that. Now, I'm going to tell you the secret weapon that took me global. This is going to freak you out. You're not even going to believe this. Right at the very beginning of my career, I noticed something. I would do paintings that everybody loved, but only one person could buy them. So straight away you think, okay, prints, yeah. But what I did is I made postcards. Now, there were a few university-educated artists in town, and they used to put me down because I sold postcards. They would say, oh, real artists don't sell $2 postcards. Guess what? I sold thousands and thousands. I sold boxes of them. 1995 or even earlier, $30,000 of postcards was annually what I would turn over year after year at $1 each. Back then, people actually sent postcards from their holidays. And in Broome, they would buy a dozen at a time of my cards because they were there. And they would send them all around the world, back home, Germany, France, UK, United States, China. Those postcards were ambassadors. What did it cost me? $1. And those cards would travel all over the world. You know what's on the back of them? By then, let's say I had a website, it was very, very crude. My website, my actual address in Broome, my name, basically my brand was on the back. That's what I did to travel the world for free. I got paid. Crazy, isn't it? Now you think that's pretty cool. Listen to this one. This happened more than once, but I'm going to give you one incredible story. If you think postcards are dumb, listen to this. One story only of many. I was at my exhibition opening at New Collectibles Gallery in Perth. A wonderful event. Things were going great. Lots of paintings sold, including this great big one in front of me. I was standing there and this guy came up, an Asian chap with his partner. He was fussing around with something. He pulled out this dog-eared card. It was a postcard and he showed it to me and he said, look at this. And I said, oh, wow, that's from ages ago. That's from 10 years ago. And he said, when I was studying to be a heart surgeon, this was all I could afford. I loved it so much that I pegged it up on my wall and I swore that one day when I finally became a surgeon, I would buy one of your paintings. And that man and his wife had just purchased a major painting at that exhibition off the wall. He was now a heart surgeon, he had plenty of money, and he was a very happy man. And I could tell you that story over and over because it happened time after time. You never know who you're selling to. You're selling a postcard. You know, you got your nose up in the air and you think, oh, you know, it ain't how it is, baby. It ain't how it is. You just never know. The struggling student buys a postcard and he put it on his toilet wall, mind you, and he stared at it for years. It was like, you know, a symbol. And then he came back and spent $20,000 on one of my paintings. That postcard was a seed. Never ever look down on a small transaction. You're always planting your art in someone's mind. You're letting them aspire to own you. So I did all this with a fax machine. Now, you know, I did that with prints and made print catalogues, and those works went all over the world because they could. And it wasn't like a commercial sellout. The integrity in making prints is far higher than you repainting your best paintings and pretending they're original paintings. And you can still do it today using the modern tools that are at your fingertips. I hope you can extract something from what I've told you. I made that work, and I was one of the highest earning artists in Australia at that time. And I did it from a remote town in West Australia. I didn't even have a website, let alone Instagram. We had nothing. I remember clearly our accountant coming one day and forcing me to get this crappy old box computer so I could do the bookwork for our trucking business. I was terrified, but I took it on. You've got the entire world in your pocket now. You've got no excuse, but you've got to remember the system. If you respect your own soul work, then maybe try and respect the soul of other people, your client, and just run through those tests. You know, I think the first one, would someone hang this on their wall? Would I hang this on my wall? Pretend you're not you. And then you've got to have your big frog in the small pond aspect. Work that out based on today. What's going on today with technology? Very important point, you've got to serve them, right? Take care of logistics. Be a good trader. And don't forget to plant the seeds where you may not think is the ideal place at the time. You don't know how they're going to grow. So you don't need to be beholden to the trap of just working with art galleries, but they're not going to, you know, make all your dreams come true. They're just part of it. They'll build your CV in the background. That really is the pragmatic fundamentals of it. You can take your creative spirit, your work, your capacity, you know, you can take that well outside the galleries and build, build, build. So what I meant in the previous video about that work becoming secondhand after it's not sold in the gallery is that if you leave it in situ in that place, in that area, in that town, and you use that same system to try and sell it, it is going to become, you know, like a drag on your leg. Change how you do things. Recreate yourself all the time. Build your own door and walk through it. I made this list. When I was sort of brainstorming, what did I do to make money? I'm just going to read it off really fast. It was just like a brainstorm list, and I'll punch it up on the screen. First things that came to my mind. Postcards. I showed up. I solved problems. I was a big frog in a small pond. I said yes all the time. I reached out. I pushed hard for opportunities. I got opportunity because I did. I used that to get more leveraged all the time. It always worked. I entered prizes. I got seen. I got into local commercial galleries when I started. You know, I bit off the small pieces where I could get in. I didn't try and measure myself by getting into some great big gallery at the start. Forget it. Just go where you can get in. Like, go to a local cafe. Just get on the wall. Prove yourself up. Lower the bar. You know, start where you can actually achieve something. Otherwise, you'll give up. Drop it down a bit. I did things that others wouldn't do. I didn't follow trends. I said yes outside my comfort zone often. I assumed I could. I didn't ever think I couldn't. I tried new things. I started prints because it was logical, the same as postcards. I even printed my own prints. I used to create etchings and collagraphs. Anything I could. I got an etching press. I bought it secondhand from an artist. I learned how to do it. I made lots of money from those handmade collagraphs. You know, there were only editions of 50, but it worked. And it was fun. It was something new. I made a catalogue of my work. I made a print catalogue so I could send it all over the place. People loved that. I made all my own promotional stuff. I'd go around and put posters on the wall. Photocopy, I'd write something up on a bit of paper and I'd just stick it everywhere, in shopping centres, on your local IGA or shop, wherever you go. I kept going. I know I'm repeating it, but logistics never stopped me. I worked out how to get around them. And that also cut out a lot of the middlemen, you know, the cost. I treated it all as a really serious business. Once it started working, I reinvested in my business over and over. I bought framing equipment. You know, I got guillotines, I got, you know, V-nailers and everything, so I could keep doing it more and more. I think the huge advantage was I was isolated. We had no picture framers at that time. I had to order in all my moulding, mat boards. It just gave me more power though, because then I could produce fast and I could get the end result fast. I would always have this framed thing in my hands. So when people came to the gallery, something could be on the wall within a couple of hours or an hour or less. I could frame it while I was standing there. I created systems that worked for the time. So in there, as I said, it was Ostwide and then prints, and later I made what I called pods, which were where I created this whole print system, which I put out to various art shops where they had all my prints in this little box. They had a catalogue. Oh, you know, that was like wholesale business. It went really well for a few years, and that got me, you know, I became a household name. I donated tons and tons of work. There's so many winners. It's not just the fact that you get a tax deduction for that, but the charities loved it. It was so good to give so much work. They just got thousands and thousands of dollars of work, and that spreads your name as well. You don't have to give your prime, you know, work that you can sell. It's just a remarkable way to expand your presence. And there was another way that I was able to dispose of unsold works as well. I won because I got a tax deduction, because at the time I had, you know, had to pay a lot of tax because I was earning a lot of money. The charity just got like huge lifts in what they could actually do their auctioning on. And the people that were buying them always got a really good deal. And everyone was happy. Yay! You know, I opened my studio. Everywhere I go, I had my studio open. It's only in the later years that I stopped doing that because I wanted more privacy, but I was always there. Very importantly, I was brave in my work. You know, I did bring in that X factor. I did try things. I pushed my audience. There were safe zones. I knew where to work in the commercial safe zones, but I would just push it a little bit further. Sometimes they wouldn't sell, and I would have, you know, these boundaries I'd work within. I go, yeah, I know that will sell. But then I would sort of add these elements, these X factors, these things that came more from in here. And, you know, surprisingly, when I took those risks in that way, they would often work. But I did it within this kind of framework of respect for the client and add in the surprise factor. That's the X factor. That's how you can elevate the whole concept of sharing your soul. That probably deserves its own video. I milked opportunities like Qantas commissioned me to do the front cover of their in-flight magazine and the Qantas Club magazine. They sent me on the QE2 in the transatlantic to get the research for that. Amazing. And that was due to a contact that I'd made in Broome for a Sydney gallery. You know, these things just grow and grow. I flew to Sydney to QE2's office, made an appointment, walked into the head of the QE2 in Sydney and asked her if I could do an exhibition on board the QE2 when it came to Australia. Guess what? She said yes. Oh, and then I had to do all the logistics. I had to get the easels and the paintings on board the Oh, do you see what I mean about logistics? I created this massive machine. In the end, it was too much. I had to shut it all down. But while I was in it, I did it because I just never said no, and I just kept going. It meant I had to hire people, and I had my own galleries at times. That is also how I sold a lot more work, but I wouldn't expect everybody to do that or recommend it. I never used social media. I had a website towards the very end of what I would call my peak. I eventually got a website, but it wasn't till, gosh, probably mid 2000s, and it had some crazy name, which we did back then. We didn't have clean domains like helennorton.com.au. The whole thing was created on postage stamps, fax machines, phone calls, and real live people. Making stuff, making it happen. And I don't think that is actually impossible to do right now. I think we are living in an age where people want that now. They want it more than ever. They want the return to the physicality. So think that through. What could you do locally? How can you be a big fish in a little pond? And never forget the client. Okay. Oh, that's enough. I've gone way over time.